Welcome to all the participants. I've had a look at some of you who filled up the forms, and also I've been looking at the chat box on your introductions. It's very nice, very interesting to see so many of you coming from different backgrounds. We're already looking at quite a diverse range of organizations working on different issues, and I think we're also seeing a lot of organizations of various sizes. So what I'm going to try and do is really share my experiences working with organizations in fundraising, and what I have put down as the absolute essentials required to start fundraising in your organization. Some of you have already been doing that and probably already have teams to do that, but we will look at how best we can put it together and make sure that we get on the road to financial sustainability. That's the idea of this workshop. So I'm going to go over, as I said, the essentials of fundraising and take you through some of the key steps required. We will first look at the groundwork, I'm just giving you a roadmap of what the session is going to be. We will look at the groundwork required for you to start looking at fundraising and drafting a fundraising strategy for your organization, how to identify sources, and fundraising techniques. I'm sure a lot of you have quite a bit of idea on how to fundraise and what are the techniques to use, but really about how to choose fundraising techniques that will suit your organization best. And we'll also look at communication, because we all know that without communicating, you can't really fundraise. So we will look carefully at how to communicate and what are the things to keep in mind when you're preparing communication material for your organization. And then we will look at donor relationships. We already have a session coming up on donor relationships, but I'll just look at an overview of how to cultivate donors, and we will go into some of the details of that. And the last part that I will be touching on is really principles of fundraising, some of which are universally known, some of which I've just felt are very, very important in the work that I've done with organizations. So I've just put them up. And so let's proceed. Very often when I've worked with organizations, what has happened is sometimes we're not really looking at a strategic plan or an organizational strategic plan and budget. We're highly passionate individuals who have started an organization and have got a vision and mission probably in their heads, but it takes time to put down a plan and budget for your organization. So that's very important to make sure that we know where we're going, say 5 years from now as an organization, and then we plan for it. So this is something that helps, not just in our minds, but when you approach supporters to support the work that you do, it helps to say, this is what we are, this is the problem that we're going to solve, and this is how we're going to solve it. And this is what we're going to do. So this organizational strategic plan and budget will help you with 2 or 3 things that you need to do to look at your fundraising strategy. The first thing is, of course, a needs analysis. The needs analysis will be looking at what it is that you already have funds for, what do you need to raise funds for, how much do you need to raise funds for, in simple terms. Okay, so if you're able to look up that will help you a lot. Then, of course, the SWOT analysis for your organization with regard to fundraising. What are your strengths and weaknesses in relation to fundraising, and the opportunities and threats you have. It's very surprising when we do the SWOT analysis with organizations, and we either break up into teams or people do them individually. There are a lot of surprises that spring up in opportunities and threats that some of us completely overlooked, and some of us are it's like an elephant in the room staring at us. So a SWOT analysis in relation to fundraising is very crucial. And then those of us who've done fundraising so far, how have we raised funds so far? Okay, So a fundraising audit of what it is that you have done so far. If you look up the Boston Matrix and frameworks like that, look it up and see that it can go to a very high level of detail. Some of us can get very daunted by that, but it really helps to have some sort of an idea on what it is that we have done, what has worked, what has not worked, in simple terms, and why has something not worked. So I would recommend a fundraising audit if you've already started looking at raising funds. So when we do these kind of analysis, some of these things become very clear, right? What do we want to raise funds for? Who do we want to raise it from? Although we look at that more in detail. How much do we want to raise? And it's important to plan. It's important to plan how much are we going to raise this year, next year, and for the next 5 years at least. 3 to 5 years is a good idea to have on what you want to raise funds for. Okay, so I would suggest that, although in my experience, I am going to share that some of the organizations that I've worked with have just gone ahead and done things in the first year and then turned it around completely and have had different plans the second year. Nevertheless, it helps to plan. And then the last part, which is very, very important, because if you're going to start to raise funds, you will need to build in your fundraising costs. There will be some costs of fundraising, salaries and other overheads, which you will need to build it in. So build that in right at the beginning into your plan. The third aspect of groundwork that I'd like to speak about, some organizations work on this very meticulously, especially while writing to grant makers, institutional grant makers. Again, this helps within your organization, because when you look at who does the fundraising, it's practically everybody in the organization who helps with raising funds. So developing a case for support makes it clear in everybody's head as to what you're raising funds for, what is the problem that you're looking at solving, what is the solution that you want to solve. Very clear, these could be just short paragraphs on each of these 5 items that I've outlined here. But this is a simple way of looking at it, breaking it up, and then you could go in and add to any level of detail that's required. Okay. The fourth aspect, why is it that you are the most best suited organization? The fourth and fifth aspects are things that you will have to, aspects that you will have to spend quite a bit of time on, because that is where you get asked a lot of questions, right? How are you suited best to solve this situation? What sort of a background do you have to solve this problem? And what gives you a leverage over other organizations working in the same space? Okay. And the fifth part, that is measuring results and impact. First, you measure the results of your intervention or the work that you are doing. How have the beneficiaries been helped? And the impact, the long-term impact of the work that you're doing. These are things that, these are the points that most grant makers, most donors are looking at, asking you when, are trying to find out before making a decision to support you, right? So every time you send out a communication to raise funds, every time you prepare a fundraising strategy, it's important to keep understanding it from the point of view of the donor. What is it? What is the point? What are the potential questions that the donors will be asking when they want to support us, right? So coming to the sources. Now, the sources, very often we think of whom do we approach, okay? And when you start to raise funds, especially for the smaller organizations and the new organizations, what I really tell them is look at yourself at the center, and look at the people who could support you as, in concentric circles around you. Who is the closest circle to you? And who after that and after that. So, the closest circle will obviously be your staff, your family members, your friends, family, your well-wishers. That would be your closest circle, and people who are already supporting you. Every single source over here could you could apply the same concentric circle exercise and look at who is it that who would want to support you. For example, if you look at major donors or trusts and foundations, who are the trusts and foundations who are most likely to support you? How will you break it down and see who are the ones that are most interested in your cause, who has supported this in the past? Where will you find this information from? Annual reports, websites. How could you gather this information to figure out who you want to approach, right? So it's an important part of research to figure out who you want to approach and how you want to approach them. So each aspect, each source that you want to approach, you would be really looking at different ways of approaching them. So that I've just put down some techniques here just to give you an idea. But this is a matrix that you, if you do at the beginning to look at one particular need, once you've done the need analysis and you figure out what you want to raise funds for, then identifying the sources and look at what are the techniques you're going to use, who all are you going to approach um, to raise that fund. As far as fundraising techniques are concerned, we've had we have here capital campaigns. We've got some techniques down here, but I'm sure you have you've tried a lot more fundraising techniques. I'm going to pause a little bit here and just ask you to type in the chat box what are the kind of fundraising techniques that you have tried. Okay. Okay. Here I do see participatory fundraising. Could you just unmute yourself and speak about your experience with participatory fundraising more?
Yeah, so we did, I did one for the first time this year. We did what we call the movement fund for our organization. It was basically individuals would pick some type of movement activity that they can perform. And then we asked them to set a goal and then basically perform their activity per their goal. So it was our first time doing it, and we have a little learning experience from it as well. So yeah, we're hoping to maybe try it again later this year.
Okay. Were you able to, what was the objective of this event?
It was to raise funds for our organization. So we have two vegan programs in our organization. We have a vegan pledge program, which is a 30-day challenge. And then we have a vegan activist training program that we just started last year. So it's to raise funds to support those two programs.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mo. I think we can let two more people share their experiences based on the time that we have on hand. Anyone else would like to share? I see some of you. Yeah.
I can share a little bit from my experience. For the techniques that I've mentioned, gets to fundraising, to organizations, of course, our organization very small. We didn't apply those techniques. Rather than we use it to visit the website that we share the similar visions and the purpose. Then we engage with them. But the most techniques that we've been using is on letting concept notes, also developing proposals. But the case that we really witnessed, we didn't, we're not able to secure the funds.
Okay.
Thanks.
And why do you think so? Why were you not able to secure the funds? What happened? Sorry, I wasn't able to follow clearly.
Yeah, the reason behind majority of where we tell that there are a few they provide us feedbacks. That's why we didn't receive funds, but other they didn't provide feedbacks. Most of them tell that we applied questions, but there's other fundraising criteria that we didn't meet. For instance, they could ask you for organization to be registered for 2-3 years working, 3 years working experience, but also having a team that is patient, that's suffering a lot during fundraising when we're resourcing for grants. So that's the major challenge that we do experience.
Okay. It's probably the audio, but I didn't really get that. So what I do is we can stop here. Sorry, Emmanuel, that I couldn't clearly understand what you were saying. We'll come back to you, or if you can type out the message, and we'll come back to this later. So moving on, thank you for sharing. We'll try and see if we can address some specific questions at the end of the program. So with regard to fundraising techniques, each one of these techniques we can discuss in detail and look at what is it that we need to fundraising technique to apply to your organization. I would say look at understanding the technique carefully. Look at whether it would suit the kind of source that you are wanting to approach, right? Whether you as an organization are equipped to take on an activity. For example, it could be an event, or it could be crowdfunding or participatory fundraising, or a multi-year giving campaign, which means a campaign to get people to give to you several times in the year. Right. So whichever ones of these you choose, study it well to see how well it would match the work that you do, and in what way it would help you raise funds, right? So there are a lot of things that go into a lot of points that you would need to consider rather, when you choose your fundraising techniques, right? So it's really weighing the risks against the rewards. What are the risks you're taking when you, for example, plan a fundraising event, and what is it that you're willing to what is it that you're going to be raising? What's your objective? Sometimes the objective may not be really raising funds from an event. It would be really visibility or image building that is required. You might raise very little funds, but you would you would build the image of your organization manyfold when you organize an event. So these are things that you could look at. I'll just go over some of these points a little more in detail, because they're very, very crucial when you choose the fundraising techniques and plan out your strategy for fundraising. Often there are things to be considered. The first two aspects are things that I would really recommend organizations to consider when you're looking especially at the needs analysis. what are your capital costs? What are your recurring costs, right? What do you need to raise funds for once, and then you don't need to raise funds again for that? And how do you raise funds for recurring costs, right? For example, let's just take a school, or let's look at a school. Now, if you look at a school, setting up a school and setting up a building is going to cost much more. And how do you raise funds for it? Recurring costs would be looking at educational costs or feeding costs, feeding the children. Those costs year on year, month on month, and every week, right? So you could break it down into that. Recurring costs are also the rent that you pay. A lot of recurring costs will come in. Okay, so factor that in and look at how you're going to raise funds for these. Also having this in your mind will help you approach different types of donors and use different types of techniques. And then the techniques, there are some with restricted funds and unrestricted funds, or tied and untied funds. The tied funds really come from grant makers and corporate givers and institutional givers or major donors who say we want our money to be used specifically for this purpose. And there are things like donation boxes and some other places where people donate to you, and you have the liberty to choose where your need is the highest. You will need a good mix of these kinds of fundraising, different kinds of funds coming in, to help you have some flexibility on how to manage your funds flow as well as outflow, right? Inflow and outflow. And then there are high risk and low risk fundraising. For example, a special event with a celebrity is going to cost you a lot. It's a huge risk that you're going to be taking, okay, for instance. But how do you balance it with some other low risk fundraising, which will help you look at raising the funds, right? Consider each one of these. In fact, I would say plot a graph with the x-axis having high income and low income, and the y-axis of high risk and low risk, and put your fundraising technique on each part of this graph and see where does each fundraising technique fit in, right? Which is more low risk and which is high income. Which are the ones that fall into some of the other categories, right? So do this exercise to understand that you need to have a good mix, and we're not all through the year not trying out new things which may not give us too many funds, but we've just tried out different aspects. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind, and also the external and internal realities. Now, when you do a good, some of it might come up in your SWOT analysis. For example, an external reality may be another organization in your close vicinity who's working on the same project, who is also starting to look at an event around the same time that you are, right? That could be an external reality. An internal reality could be that the founder is looking at leaving your organization 2 years from now. How does your organization deal with that, right? So I'm just giving you an example to understand which are all the aspects that could affect your fundraising, right? So look at every aspect of it, and finally look at long-term sustainability of your organization. Really what this means is not putting all your eggs in one basket, which means not falling back on institutional fundraising as most of us have. You'll be surprised every time we do a fundraising analysis with organizations as part of a group. I do this course over 2 to 3 days. So one of the sessions is really an income analysis exercise. And when we do the income analysis exercise, 95% of the organizations have 95% of their funds coming from grant makers. Okay, and the reality hasn't changed much in the last 20 years. From the time I started till now, more or less, that's where we are. Right. So how do we find, how do we find a better mix of the sources that we're going to? How could we involve the government? How could we involve major donors? How could we look at individual giving? What are the techniques that we could use to involve more of more of other types of donors who would be giving to us, and something that is less risk for us. A few donors, few individual donors who drop off at the end of the year is easier to deal with than a few grant makers who would suddenly decide to fund somebody else, right? Whose priorities change. So I'm sure this is something that you have considered or you have come across. So let's look at that reality, and let's look at how we are going to sustain our organizations in the long term, and consider that while choosing the fundraising techniques that we want. The fourth aspect, which I usually cover a lot before we go into the fundraising part, is really the communication aspect. One of the most interesting things that we've been hearing through the years now is storytelling. And we've been talking about storytelling as stories of change in the voluntary sector. Okay, what we have been looking at is helping organizations speak about how they have changed the lives of people around them. What is it that they do? And stories are a great way for people to emote and connect, right? So when you write stories, it's important to look at outlining the questions that we have here, right? Each of the stories that you write should be looking at explaining whose lives you are changing, right? How are you helping them? How much does it cost to bring about the change? What will you achieve? Or how will you measure impact? These are the stories that people really want to hear. We've been hearing stories of organizational change, but we also would be it would be interesting to hear for donors, especially, it would be interesting to hear how the lives of individuals have changed as a result of the work that you are doing, right? The other aspects of targeting your donors, sorry, just one other point that I needed to make here. Storytelling can be done using different mediums these days. So we're really talking about telling our stories through videos, telling our stories through communication material, print material, and different ways in which we can do it. You could just get a beautiful video with just photographs and the story that's written out, right? So these are the aspects that we would like to look at. I'm having a bit of an issue with the power situation here, but we do have backup, so I'm hoping that we will tide over this. Usually it's about 5 to 10 minutes, so the lighting is gone. Excuse me for that. So coming back to the communication aspect, it's important to target your donors, right? When you write to say grant makers, when you're approaching donors, completely writing cold mails to everybody is not going to help you as much as figuring out which segment of this donor would be really interested in the work that you are doing, right? Understanding that aspect, and then writing targeted communication to that particular segment is going to help us quite a bit. Build your image. It's important to build our image, because transparency and credibility is something, and accountability, credibility are things that are very, very crucial in some parts of the world, where organizations, voluntary organizations, civil society organizations are not really famous for being very open about where the money comes in and where it goes, right? So we need to be building our image on where we're getting money from, how we're spending it, and being transparent about how we're spending it. And some of the things that I focus on when we speak about this is having an annual report, having a website, simple statements in your annual report, for instance, which will talk about a complete audited statement of accounts is available on request, right? Simple statements like this, which say that you are open and which say that you're open to scrutiny if required. So communicate to build your image and ensure that people know that you are transparent and accountable. Using language effectively to help you, using different mediums, people also start to identify you with the kind of language that you use, right? So these are important. And of course, in the digital and online, leverage the digital and online platforms to help you communicate wider. Some of you may already be doing it. Some of you may be facing a few glitches while doing it. But the good part is there is a lot of material online on what are the problems you could encounter, what are the problems that you could face while trying to put out digital and online communications, and how to overcome them. The fifth aspect is, could you just give me a minute so I could just make the room a little brighter? Just a minute, please. I'm not sure if that's helped, but moving on. Cultivating donors. Choose your potential donors based on their interest in your cause. As I said, this is a very important aspect even before you start to raise funds. Who you approach and how you approach them, not having a one-size-fits-all approach, but an approach that says you will approach every segment of your donors differently, right? So their interest in your cause is very important. Otherwise, you could be barking up the wrong tree and wasting your time as well as the donors' time, which would end up with a lot of people being upset. The second aspect of cultivating donors is telling your stories of change and impact, which will really help donors connect with you. I give a simple example to organizations. For instance, when you look at wanting to raise funds, right? Supposing I want a scholarship, right? I'm applying to someone to fund my study, right? And I tell them I wake up early morning and I study the whole day. I'm very good at this. This is what I do. I study a lot. I put in a lot of effort into my study, right? Would you please be interested in funding my studies? I take a different route with another set of donors and say, do you know that I passed out with an excellent, outstanding grade last year? This is my track record, right? I have been standing first in my class throughout the last 5 years, and this year I'm facing a lot of issues for support of my organization, support of my studies. Which approach do you think would gather more support, is more likely to gather support? The second one or the first one? Anybody in the chat? The second. So the thing is really because it's more personal. Absolutely, you're right. It's more personal, one thing. Second is it's showing some sort of an achievement. It's showing that people who are going to invest in me are going to make sure that you're going to make sure that there is going to be a result, right? So the first thing talks about the activity that I'm doing. The second approach talks about my achievement. You see the difference between an activity and an achievement? So communicate the impact, communicate the achievements that you have in order to raise funds and cultivate your donors. The next aspect that I would like to talk about is engaging and involving your donors. We have an organization here in Bangalore working with disadvantaged children, and they also work a lot with corporate clients to come and support the work that they do. But it's not easy to get people in the corporates to come and in businesses to come and open up their purses and give them donations easily. So one of the things that they do to involve and engage donors is they have a cricket match every Sunday. And they invite, the cricket match is played by these disadvantaged children, and they have an hour or two of inviting the corporate employees to come and spend time with the children. So it's an engagement which opens up the organization and the beneficiaries of the work that you're doing to observe you at close quarters and how you are working with these children, right? So that's one way of involving donors in the work that you do. One of the other things that this organization does is get some of these employees to become mentors for these children, because most often these children come from disadvantaged families who don't have other people who would mentor them, have family members who would mentor them. So that's again another level of involvement, right, in the work that you're doing. So when you do these things, most of the time the employees are able to go back, communicate in their teams, in their in their circles about the work that this organization doing, and is in some ways become ambassadors for your organization back in their company. So it becomes easier for the leadership to take a call on supporting you, right? So you can involve donors at various levels. Okay. The other aspect about building relationships might seem like I don't know, it's probably the most important aspect. Very many years ago, when I met somebody in the UK with regard to raising funds, he was a great fundraising trainer himself, and he said that fundraising is really about friend raising. It's really about building relationships with your donors, and that stuck with me. I do also remember another story of a lady who told me that there were many years ago. There was one of the donors whom she started visiting because she was much older and she didn't have her family living with her. So what she would do is, maybe weekly once when she found the time, or monthly once, she would make sure that she found some time to visit this lady, because she didn't have her kids coming and visiting her. So this went on for a few months and probably a few years before the lady passed away. And she was very, very surprised, this fundraiser, when this lady left her entire legacy to the organization. She said that's when it hit me that, these small interactions that we've had, without realizing that that I'm building a strong bond with her, and that it would amount to her actually leaving a legacy to the organization, was not something that I had planned. But it's driving home the point that building relationships with donors is very, very crucial. Right. So we'll come to that again when we speak about the fundraising principles and why this is so important. Then moving on, thanking and reporting on time, which is very important, especially with institutional donors, reporting on time and thanking differently. Often what happens is when we give a donation, we immediately get a thank you letter or a thank you note, and then it's forgotten. But to be able to get back to donors and to remind them, you need to be in touch with them. So keeping in touch with them, sharing progress of the work that you are doing is crucial. And of course, when I here talk about long-term sustainability, I'm talking about retaining your donors. Okay, I'm sure you all know that it costs much less to retain a donor than to gain a new donor. So retaining your donors is really moving them up the fundraising pyramid, right? So you probably already have seen this. The bottom of the pyramid are your potential donors. You need to move your donors up the pyramid. right? So your potential donors could become your first-time donors, regular donors. So only some of them would go on to becoming major donors and lifetime donors, probably, even leaving a legacy for you. So all your donor cultivation techniques should be employed to move your donors from one segment to another of the pyramid. And the other reason why you also segment your donors is to make sure that the communication that you have with each segment is targeted and is different, right? We're coming to the last section of the session today, and that is the fundraising principles that I spoke about. Sometimes I refer to these as the 10 commandments of fundraising, because really these lie at the background of every aspect of fundraising that we do. The first thing is about people giving to people, right? We spoke earlier on about this lady who built relations with one of her donors. You do see now that the donor was not really the donor was giving to the organization, but really what she was most pleased about is the way you get treated as another person, right? You do not treat your donor as just a checkbook or a person who just writes out hands in the cash to you. It's not a purse, but it's a person that you're interacting with. And once we realize that we are dealing with people, whether they're institutional donors or individual donors, people are really giving to the people who work in an organization, and the other way around. When they build relationships, it's sometimes donors tell me that you build relationships for a lifetime with some of the donors. So very often there are donors who would shift organizations when fundraisers move from one organization to another, right? So that's how important building relationships is, and understanding this aspect. The second principle that I'd like to talk about is making it easy for the donor to give. Very often you've heard in the digital world that it's just a click away, right? Giving you're just a click away from losing a donation, right? So that brings us to the third aspect also, which is the 30-second rule. When you approach a donor, most often the decisions are made in the first 30 seconds of your speaking, whether they're going to donate to you or not, how effective you are in communicating what you are saying, right? So the first aspect, the second aspect that we're speaking about, making it easy for the donor, is ensuring that you explain to the donor exactly what can be achieved with specific sums of money, right? So for instance, $200 could achieve this, $500 could achieve this, and $1,000 could help you do this, right? Making it easier for the donor. And then when you actually want to make the payment, whether it's digital or write out a check, having a donation form, if it is a printed donation ask, or making it just clickable in 3 steps, right? You choose your donation option, you fill out your contact details, and finally make the payment. So it has to be very clear that you make it easy for the donor to give. The more difficult it is for them to make the decision, the more likely it is that they're going to go away and think of something else to do, because it's very easy to get distracted. The fourth aspect, the 30-second rule, as I said, is making that decision in the 30-second rule. The other aspect of the 30-second rule is when you send out communication material to raise funds, follow the staggered rule also. Is it interesting enough to look at for 3 seconds? After 3 seconds, would you pick it up to read it for 30 seconds longer? Would a person pick it up and read it for 30 seconds? If it holds their attention for 30 seconds, would they spend 3 minutes on it? And if you picked up material that you haven't asked for, if you pick up a brochure that's come to you from from an organization that you have not asked for, will you spend the 3 seconds and the 30 seconds and the 3 minutes on it? Why or why not? Do this exercise with yourself, and then you will understand why this 3 second, 30 second, and the 3 minute rule is so important. And how you need to communicate to cater to every kind of reader, the 3 second reader, the 30 second reader, and the 3 minute reader. And then, of course, moving on, we'll move to the fourth point, which is the 80-20 principle. Now, this I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. Going back to the donor pyramid, 80% of your money is probably going to come from the top of the pyramid, which is just 20% of your donors, right? So we need to treat those 20% differently. We will need to romance them a little differently, speak to them a little differently to ensure that they stay there and continue to continue to support you and also possibly get you more donors, right? So understanding donor segmentation is the most important aspect of the 80-20 principle. And then leveraging peer pressure. Often fundraisers share that it's easier to make an ask when people are in a group, and more people are likely to give when they are sitting there as a community and you make an ask, than when you make individual asks. Even with corporate fundraising, when you're asking employees in a room to look at supporting you, somebody would support you just because somewhere 2-3 other people are supporting you, right? And it's easier to make that decision. So leverage peer pressure wherever it's possible. Speak to people in a group. The sixth point, which is telling the truth, there have been so many times when I've seen highly exaggerated communication or highly down-to-earth communication. Both of them are not going to pass the mark for marketing or communicating the work that you do. Sooner or later, people are going to find out that you're exaggerating. And if you're being too down to earth or below the earth level sometimes on what it is that you do, and it again doesn't drive home the point that you are bringing about change. If you're looking at raising funds, if you're looking at communicating, you are the one who can communicate best the change that you are bringing about. So we need to understand we have to be very, very open in the way that we talk, and we need to be very very clear about how we talk, choose language carefully, but of course say the truth all the time. Okay, so that's an important aspect. The seventh is a very, very tricky rule. Asking for the right amount. It comes with practice. I don't know if Emmanuel spoke about this part. I got that in some part of what he was talking about. Asking for the right amount is very, very important, but it's tricky because you never know what is the right amount. So the best thing to do is the ninth point, which is testing. Segment your donors and test. One segment of your donors, ask them for 200, 500, and 1,000. Another segment, you could go from 2,000, 5,000 to 7 or 10,000 dollars. And then you look at which is the segment you are getting most donations from, right? Which is the amounts that more people are bordering towards, and then give more options in that segment. And test the different things. Asking for the right amount is not easy, but you can, with the algorithms and other things available, you can target it quite a bit these days, who you send it out to, and sort of understand what is the kind of amounts that you want to give. There are donor relation softwares available that you could look at, which will help your work become a little easier. Just think about it and do a little bit of research about this, and try different things. Don't worry too much, but give it a little bit of thought before you start. The eighth is planning. Planning is something that I used to overemphasize earlier. Before a few organizations were able to do minimal planning, but still they did do some planning. But so the caution that I would put out on the table here is sometimes in fundraising, if you over plan, you miss the bus, right? You need to go out there and you need to start talking and you need to start raising funds. So it's all right to make a few mistakes. It's important to plan and know the bigger picture, but then don't get too stuck with the plan. Start rolling. And then we spoke about testing. Test different aspects, test the amounts, test the kind of material you send. Material, you could send out material in black and white, you could send it out on expensive paper, you could send it out on really simple paper. Send out different mailers, send out different kinds of videos, see which ones garner more response. So test every aspect, test different kinds of fundraising, test to different segments. So that's very, very important that you do that. And of course, you know in the back of your mind what are the risks involved. And then thanking in different ways. As I said this earlier, there is this organization that I knew of in Sri Lanka, which again ran a home for children. And the only thing that he produced in order to raise funds was his annual report. I'll make this story short because we seem to be running close to time. The thing he said was, the only thing that I do to raise funds is this annual report. And this annual report was about 20 pages long, and about 15 pages were just lists and lists of people who had donated in that year, thanking the donors. The rest of the report was really on activities and achievements and probably their finances, but thanking donors with their names in their annual report. He said, this is all I do. So there are very interesting stories that come up when you look at how people are thanking donors. Sometimes people call them to their organization to be a part of their celebrations when someone donates something to their kids. So how can you thank them in different ways? Which is important for especially major donors and regular givers to be a part of your organization. So come up with creative ways to do that, because this is all part of the relationship building. Now, going back to the slide on fundraising techniques, when you're choosing for each and every fundraising technique, make sure you have these things in mind, these points in mind. Connect your ask with the prospect's interests. Know what you're asking for. Really, when you approach a grant maker or a major donor, when you are being given time to meet them and make an ask, be very clear what you're going to be asking for. Have a fallback plan in case that falls through, or they refuse, or they say this is not what we think we are going to be able to help you with. Practice it, and always keep it high energy. Very, very important. Especially when you're meeting organizations, they'd like to see that their money is going to be used well. So always keep it high energy. Most people give for the passion that you display when you are approaching organizations. This is the final slide, and in many ways it's summing up all that we have spoken about so far. On your road to building a sustainable organization, there are a few things to keep in mind. These are overarching things. You have to promote the work that you do. If you do not promote it, people are not going to notice on their own. Just having a website is not enough. Being there, is not enough. You need to talk about it. And in this day and age, we need to really talk about, we need to put out posts, we need to use social media, we need to use different mediums to promote the work that we're doing so that we get noticed. So if you're planning an event, you need to be having enough communication around the event, around your organization, and they all need to be interlinked and networked. People need to be clicking different aspects to find out different aspects of your organizations to make your event a success, right? So everything is networked. So promote your work. Tap local resources and involve local communities. I can never underemphasize this. It's a very important aspect of what you do. When the local communities support you, then that's a great endorsement of the work that you are doing. Right? It helps you approach larger donors, the donors who are away from you. It helps you a lot in terms of the confidence you have to approach other donors. Work at retaining your regular donors. We spoke about this. Networking with like-minded organizations. Again, that's something that I'm sure you all agree on. And learning from larger organizations that continue to grow. During the pandemic, it's very sad, but a lot of organizations, smaller organizations, new organizations that I knew just closed down. There were just no funds. In India, we have another reality of the FCRA being withdrawn, which means foreign funds cannot be coming in. A lot of organizations lost their license. So some of the larger organizations that continue to thrive, how did they manage it? It's important to network. It's important to be a part of communities, part of networks, to attend, the gatherings where you can contribute as well as understand how these organizations have grown. So these are the thoughts that I'd like to leave you with. This is something that I would do over 3 to 5 days, but I'm tried my best to put everything that I had and that came to my mind in this 1.5 hours, and happy to share more. You could write to me if you will. Take a few questions now, and apart from this, you could also write to me if you have any doubts. If you think that I could help you, feel free to write to me. Over to you, Upasna, to moderate the questions.
Considering we have time, I would request the participants to raise their hands and probably, start asking questions. It will be better. It can be a good interactive session that way. So you can raise your hands and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Yes, Mohit, please go ahead, unmute yourself and you can ask the question.
Hi, ma'am. Thanks a lot. First of all, it was a great session. My question is, ma'am, you talked about the 3 second, 30 second, those kind of rules, but also, you talked about like following up with these people. So oftentimes what happens is you are sending a proposal, and then how long should we wait to, follow up if the other person is not responding? Is there a way where we should be at a position we should not also sound very desperate? Because when we do follow up a lot of time, then also it kind of sometimes backfires. Especially I've seen that with CSR organizations, because these are corporate people like and CEOs, those level of people, and after a point they stop, they start ignoring you. But also the other aspect is, if you don't really follow up at the ideal time, as you said, you can't spend a lot of time on planning and having that right strategy. Then how should we balance that? And it also, adding to this, one more aspect is like, even in these donors, there are people at different hierarchical level. So maybe following up with a CEO might be different than having a strategy with like a head of, a certain department. So do we differentiate among them as well while strategizing our follow-up process?
Yeah, I'll answer the later part of your question first. The second part, which is really on how often to follow up and how to follow up and whom to follow up with. Very often, especially because you mentioned corporates and CSR organizations, one of the reasons we have a lot of following up to do and no response coming up from the other end is because we're doing a lot of cold mailing. And very often we are sending out proposals to people who have no interest in the cause that we are working on. The first part is understanding the cause that understanding if their interests match with your cause. The second part, especially with corporates and CSR, is outlining what's in it for them in your proposals. The second aspect really is writing this out in your proposal on how is the corporate or the institution going to benefit from supporting your work. what are the different ways in which you would highlight the work that they do with you, and what are the what are their takeaways from levels to go to before you get to the CEO, because it gives you an understanding of what's going on in that organization. So try and build your network to with different people in a company or a corporate to make sure that you get an idea of what is going on from different people. One of the ways to do that is when you engage employees in the work that you do, you get more of a feel for what is going on in that organization. The first aspect of what you asked is the 333 rule. Now, the 333 rule is really for communication material that you send out. It could be an annual report or a brochure, or it could even be a proposal that you send to corporate. This reminds me of a food security organization in Africa many years ago. A lady shared that, you know, her proposal was, in a stack of different proposals that the corporates had received, and they just did not have the time to read it. So when she approached them for not having ever gotten back to her, they said, if you can find your proposal in this huge pile of proposals that we have received ever since we announced it, then I'll read it. I'm sorry. We'll read it and we'll get back to you. So she came back and started thinking about how is it that I'm going to address this. So what did she do? She came up with a plan of not just sending out a proposal. Forgive me if I'm taking a little time on this, but it's a very interesting story. She came up with an idea to bring out a box for writing to institutions, right? So the concept note or the proposal that she sent was just one aspect of that box. So I'm going to describe what she said about how the experience is when the person receives the box. So when you open the box as a donor sitting at your desk in your funding office, you see different things in that box. Okay, there's a small pot, there's a small packet of seeds, a very tiny watering can, and some documents. Okay, on the top is a letter in colorful print that says, open this packet of seeds and put the sand in the pot, put the seeds then, and water the plants, water the seeds in the plant, and put it on your office window or your kitchen window. The flowers that you see blooming in a few weeks' time are the smiles that you're going to see on women farmers that we support. This is what she said. It was many years ago, but this story has remained with me, and I tried to recollect it for you. But just helping you understand the 333 rule as being that if it's something that's interesting for you, if it's something that makes sense for you, you will open it, right? If it makes sense for you in the first 30 seconds, you will actually make an effort to open it and look at it. And if it's something that holds your attention for the next 30 seconds, then their communication is excellent, right? They're making sure they're communicating directly to you. And the third is 3 minutes. Then it's really good because you have taken different layers. You have looked at different ways people will read. For instance, nobody reads from the beginning of the annual report to the end. You would look at pictures, you would look at headlines, you would look at different aspects. So pay attention to those. Most often we get caught up in writing the entire narrative. So presenting is very important.
Sure. Ma'am, is it also to do with, now in the last 2 years, given COVID and everyone was working from home, even there's a lot of influx of, these emails also, like email communication, even Zoom meetings. So even I feel that, there is some bit of tiredness also for the donor to receive so many emails on a daily basis. That has maybe also caused it, because now we are moving to that world that people are meeting offline as well. But there's so much, tiredness in terms of receiving so many emails that also, do you think that has also made that change
Possible.
in their response rate?
Possible. And the thing I usually say is follow up your emails with actual physical letters that go out. And actually, it's more difficult to take a letter and throw it into the dustbin. An envelope that comes to your desk is more difficult to throw that away than an email, to ignore an email. Follow up your emails with actual letters, right? And physically to be able to follow it up. And this box was interesting. So think of unique ways in which you can get people's attention.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. It was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that detailed answer, and also for that very nicely put question, Mohit. There was another person who raised his hand. Emmanuel, was it you or someone else would like to question? What are your some quick tips on fundraising for small and new organizations?
Yeah. Thanks, Upasna, for asking that question. There are quite a few organizations which are new and starting to raise funds. I mean, the first thing that I would really say to them is look at the circle that's closest to you. And again, the circle that's closest to you, segregate people who are really interested in your cause, who would champion your cause for you. Identify champions for your cause and keep them close. Engage them in different ways, involve them in different ways. Of course, the first thing to do would be to write a grant proposal and get funds. Once you've done that, once you got you're running for the next few years, very often small organizations start with a lot of passion, and mostly the founders putting in a lot of the money into lot of their own personal money into setting up the organization to give fruition for their ideas. But move from there and start to involve more people right from the beginning and build your image right from the beginning. Credibility is very important. That's something that we need to be really looking at right from the beginning. How do you build the credibility of your organization? How do you make it visible? How do you make people say, yes, I know an organization here that works with animals and they're doing excellent work on this, right? And these may be people just around you. Otherwise, people around you may not even know. They probably just have no clue what you're working on. So visibility is important, and building ties is important. Building credibility is important. This is what I would say focus on in the beginning. Does that sort of answer what you had in mind, Upasna?
Yes. Yeah, it does. It is helpful.
I have a quick question. I was wondering, so when you email someone for the first time, so it's not like in person, it's like over email, would you share with them the budget for the first time, or you try to like get them on a Zoom call, or like, share the budget in a follow-up or something? Would you just share it right away in the first email?
That's a very good question. That's because a lot of the time these days, emails are our first point of contact, which is why I help organizations. The first one of the slides that we did was on the case for support. I also get organizations to work on a summary of the case for support, which is like a 4 or 5 line summary on all the 3-4 aspects that we want to convey, right? Definitely not the budget right at the beginning, but really, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? How are you best suited to solve it? And what is the solution that you want to provide? And finally, what's the impact? And then end it with a very small line on, I think the estimate for this is going to be this much. And we'd be in an email, nobody's going to be able to have the time to read it. So keep your email short and summarize, think it through. Think through what it is that you want to say in the email.
But you included the number at the end at some point. Is that okay if you don't include the number and just like get them on a call or something and then share the details? Because I also don't know if I have to tell them a number for the following year or for like the next 4 years, for instance. So
yeah, it's a good question, because oftentimes you don't know what the overall estimate is going to be. But to be upfront about it and say, this is what I plan to do over the next 5 years. And I think I am estimating the cost to be so much for a year, or per year cost to be so much. And it would also help, because I think you're worried about scaring off the donor. So it would help to say that I'm approaching quite a few people, or 5 other people, to help me support this project. And, in parts or full. So I would be happy to talk about how we could work together on this. So keep them at ease, that they're not expected to either fund you completely or worry about how much it is that they might want to support you with. But it's good to have a figure. You don't have to share a detailed budget, but it's good to have a figure in mind in the first email.
thank you so much.
Mehta, you can go ahead while Emmanuel is, writing his question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nisha, for the presentation. I really enjoyed that. And my question would be, in all of the webinars or seminars where I attend, everyone is, about fundraising, I mean, everyone is talking about how we should be, how all of the members of the organization should be included into fundraising. And my question would be, as I don't know, I think in different kinds of in different parts of the world, it is a bit maybe different. But I think that in most of the country, money is the topic which is not very comfortable to be talking about. Let's say volunteers in our organization, we just simply don't know how to talk about money, how to ask money, and they are very afraid to do that. And would you give any recommendations or advices on how to encourage people to help on fundraising in the organization if it's not a part of their task normally?
That's a very, very interesting question that you ask. A lot of organizations wonder, how do I really involve everyone? When I say that everyone in an organization helps in fundraising, it means to say that everybody in your organization is an ambassador of the work that you do. So it could be the person who picks up the phone and answers a potential donor. It's not just the CEO or the fundraiser. It could be people who, some of the staff meet at a party. How do they talk about your organization? How do they come across about the work that they are doing in your organization? And that's what I mean when I say everyone is a fundraiser. Are they saying the right things? Right? When you ask, what is your organization? What does your organization do? Are they able to explain in a single statement what we do? Are they able to answer that question? So as a fund, it is the job of the fundraiser or the fundraising team, if you have one, to raise funds, but you need support from every other employee. You need to be able to support them to say the right things. I think that's what.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And I would just like to add a few, as she mentioned, it's not just the task of the fundraising team, but generally the board members, the senior members, the director, all of them have to come and sit together, brainstorm together, and then approach the right set of people. Because as you said, asking for money is really a tough job. I mean, you cannot just go to a donor and say that this is the amount of money. So it has to be done very strategically. So that is true. The question from Emmanuel is here. He just wanted to ask about grassroots organizations. He says that at times grassroots organizations are not able to raise funds as per the plans of the strategic plan. How can that be done?
True. Upasna, the excellent thing that you brought up. So I had something that came to mind while you were speaking about the senior people in the organization. So I'll just quickly touch on that before I come to this. Some of the organizations that we worked with, I've actually asked them, apart from the board members, to actually set up an advisory board for fundraising, to help the fundraising team with their activities. So if it could be an informal advisory board that helps you, that sort of mentors you on how to raise funds, right? So it's important to have them, and it's almost like a think tank to have in relation to fundraising. So that was my quick thought on that, and I'm so glad you brought that up. The question that Emmanuel asked is something that most organizations, grassroots organizations face on how to get someone to fund us. Very valid point that we have when we have a strategic plan, and how to get somebody else to fund us for that. The idea would be for us to break our strategic, as an organization, to break up our strategic plan into bite-sized bits, which we then analyze to say, if these are the aspects that we need to raise funds for, or the projects that we need to raise funds for, do the needs analysis and get an idea of what are the capital costs, what are the recurring costs, how does each one of these projects, very often the way institutional donors look at your strategic plan and supporting you is very different from how individuals will want to support you, how major donors will want to support you, how corporates will want to support you. So we have to understand each one of these segments work differently. It is very difficult for a grant maker or a funder to look at your strategic plan and decide how we are going to help you scale, or how we are going to help you achieve your targets. That planning has to come from us, the separation and the whom to ask for what aspect of our work has to be done by us at the office.
Thank you so much, Nisha, for these excellent strategies and quick tips on fundraising. I'm sure all the participants might have gained some ideas on how they can work on their fundraising strategies. So thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you during the other sessions.